In the world of white people, she was accused of faking blackness, but in the black community, she was expected to prove it. This test was what Piper called the suffering test. Can you pass for black? Can you pass for black? But her installation of Cornered spoke to me. When I saw those 2 birth certificates on the wall, there's this weird lie, I think, that I tell myself, maybe you do this too, that sometimes, things that you're working out in your life or your family or whatever, and you think like, this is just your own weird family thing. Nobody else has this weird thing.
She'd never be associated with, she would be part Creole, but she was part Creole.
Hi, I'm Danielle Romero, and thank you so much for being with me here on my channel, where we talk about American identity and family stories. And if you're new to my channel, I started this channel as a personal project, and it evolved into something much bigger. I had just lost my grandmother, and she was really the only grandmother figure that I would say I had. And I was close to my Grammy, but towards the end of her life, she started opening up about our family story.
He's recording. Go ahead.
Hi, Danielle. It's Grammy.
Can you think of anything like your heritage? Like, did your mom tell you like what your ethnicity was growing up, or like what do you consider yourself? Like, what were you told as a child growing up?
That we were French and Irish, and that my mother, she never wanted to be associated that she was
Native American?
when you're part black. What is it?
Mulatto?
No. Called when they come from Jamaica like that.
Oh, Caribbean? No, I know what you mean. Oh,
Jamaican?
no. It'll come to us. Was that you think it had?
No, this is from the South, coming from the South. Because there was black people mixed in there with white people.
Uh-huh.
And they called I thought it wasn't called Cajun, it was something else.
Creole?
Like Creole.
Is that a thing?
That is something. She'd never be associated with, she would be part Creole, but she was part Creole. As far as Spanish.
Is that what she told you?
No, as far as Indian, no. People used to tell us that. The neighbors used to tell us that my mother was an Indian.
The neighbors told you that?
Right.
And then what did your mom say?
She just didn't start paying attention to them. But my mother never sat in the sun. She never liked her skin. Never.
Did she have dark skin?
She didn't have dark skin, but she had tan skin.
So she had a natural tan even if she didn't go in the sun?
Right.
Now, why would the neighbors think that she was part Indian?
Because she looked it.
So they just assumed it by her looks?
Right.
Like, what were her looks that would think that?
She had high cheekbones,
Uh-huh.
black hair, and tan skin.
Okay.
So they thought she was an Indian.
And I was raised with that side of the family being French and Irish. And there's French, there's Irish, and there was a lot of other stuff happening as well. I started interviewing older family members and piecing together this realization that my mom's grandmother, my Grammy's mom, had, passed for white when she left Louisiana in the 1920s. I hadn't heard that phrase before. The whole thing was a shock to me, and those videos are up as the series Finding Lola. I'm super interested in the way that American identity and American history have intersected and continue to intersect. I think you can learn a lot about our nation's history by just doing some genealogy work, to be honest. And that led me to a woman named Adrian Piper. You may know who she is. I want to talk a little bit about her work. I feel like my work is considered controversial somehow here on YouTube. I mean, if you've seen the censorship issues I've had, and if you've seen that kind of stuff, I think hers probably even more so. And so I want to dive into that right now. So picture this. You walk into a room and you immediately feel a sense of unease. In a corner of the room is a television, like an old school fat tube television. And it's half hidden behind an upturned table. The table looks like it's got thrown. Above this, on either side, are 2 birth certificates, one to the left, one to the right. And they look identical at first glance. They're framed white birth certificates. They have the same name, it's the same person, but one label on the birth certificate says white, and the other one marks this man as an octoroon, which means he's 1/8 black. In a single moment, you are plunged into this reality. This is Adrian Piper's art installation called Cornered. It's a piece of art that designs us to deal with a confrontation, not just in the room, but within ourselves. So you take a seat now. There's your seats right there because you can't help it. This space is set up to trap you, to pin you down with your own curiosity. The television flickers on, and there she is, Adrian Piper. And then she says, "I'm black." In that instant, and I know because I've read people's experiences with this art installation, people say, "What? Is she serious? Is this some kind of performance? Maybe she's just trying to get some attention." And she's asking you on the other side of the television why you assume she would pass for white. She sits there, cornered. But the irony is, she's not the one trapped there. We are. Adrian Piper explains that when she claims her black identity, it unsettles people. It disrupts the social fabric that quietly insists that anyone who could pass for white should, that they are white. If you can pass, then you are. But if she passes for white, then she becomes complicit in this very system of rejecting part of your ancestry. But here's the kicker. Piper doesn't just make this about herself. She makes it about you. And as you sit there, probably feeling a mix of intrigue and discomfort, do you look into your family tree? Have you found someone with black ancestry? If you do, what would you do with it? Would you keep it a secret? Would you tell your friends? Would you tell your coworkers? Would you tell your family? The truth is, Piper leaves you with nowhere to run. No matter what you decide, you are making a choice. And that's the brilliance of her work, Cornered. It's not just about race. It's about the choices that we make in the faces of these uncomfortable historic realities. Some people might argue that if you can pass for white, you have no right to call yourself black. But Piper flips that on its head, right? So go ahead, she says, call yourself black. But if you're hesitating, she says, you might need to ask yourself why. Cornered, the installation Cornered, is a trap, but it's not Piper who has ensnared us. It's us. It's our history. She forces us into this really uncomfortable corner where we must confront not just the history of race in America, but our own place within it. And she asks questions. What are you going to do about it? What choice will you make when you leave this room? In this art installation, the corner isn't just a physical space, it's a moral one. Now, there's a kind of a story about race in America we've heard countless times. Stories of people passing for white. This is extremely common in the Louisiana Creole culture where my gram came from, passe blanc. It's like the only French phrase I can say, Creole French phrase. And these are stories of people who camouflage themselves to avoid the consequences of being born black in a society that, especially at the time when my great-grandmother was in Louisiana, I mean, literally Jim Crow. Like that, it was the very legal framework that people existed in society. But what happens when the opposite occurs? What happens when a person who is perceived as white chooses to live as black or identifies as black? This is the story Adrian Piper confronts again and again in her work, but she also had an essay. It was called Passing for White, Passing for Black that I read. And I wasn't sure how I felt about it. I'm still not sure. I think part of the blessing and curse of this channel is that it began with me working out my own family story. And even when we take these really cool rabbit trails into the deep hidden parts of the American story, I feel like it always circles back to this concept of how do we perceive each other in America? How have we perceived each other in America and ourselves? And how has that changed over time and why? So in telling this story, I think we are asking, what is the price of passing, either way, and what does it mean when no matter how you navigate the world, you are always forced to prove yourself? She said that she grew up in a light-skinned, middle-class black family in Harlem, and she felt like she, right out from the get-go, was marked as different. She said while many other families that had similar backgrounds as hers fled to the suburbs, her family stayed in Harlem. She recalled a lot of stories where the girls in her neighborhood, she said, quote, "They yanked my braids and called me paleface." But on the flip side, she was also an outsider in what she called white spaces as a child. Her choice to not pass as white or identify as white, she said, was deliberate. But that choice came with its own consequences. Piper reflected how her parents had once suggested that maybe she should leave her racial identification blank on her graduate school application so she wouldn't be judged by her race. But for Piper, she said this was an unthinkable betrayal of her identity. And she said, well, but that would be passing, she protested. And she said that was never an option. At her graduate reception, she tells us, the first big social event of her academic journey, she felt confident, elated she had made it. She recalls the sensation of stepping into a room full of some of the brightest minds in her field. And she felt this sense of pride and accomplishment. Like, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I belong here. I can't believe these are the people I will be working with. But then came the moment that shattered her illusion of acceptance. Piper had barely settled into her surroundings when the most esteemed professor in the room, without any preamble, walked up to her and said, "Miss Piper, you're about as black as I am." Piper describes the effect as almost delayed, like the sting of an insult that doesn't land until like long after it's been uttered. You know, sometimes people tell you stuff and you just kind of have a face like this, and then like it hits you like what they really said. And she said there was this flood of emotion. She said she wasn't just disrespected as an individual, but she felt like her entire identity was questioned. She felt like the words were exposing her as an imposter. It was as if she felt that because she was identifying as black, Piper had committed some unforgivable deception on other people. And so Adrian Piper's story, while I was reading this, I'm going to tell you the truth. All I wanted to do was look her up. I didn't know what she looked like while I was reading this. I just wanted to look her up. I just wanted to see. And I was telling myself, that's part of the issue. You know, that is part of the problem. So I did end up looking her up. But I want to tell you a little bit more about her story first. She said as she navigated life in the black community, she encountered another kind of scrutiny from the other side. She said in the world of white people, she was accused of faking blackness, but in the black community, she was expected to prove it. This test was what Piper called the suffering test. It wasn't about solidarity, she says. It wasn't about shared experience or mutual understanding. Instead, it was a gatekeeping mechanism, a way for others to measure her authenticity. She said, quote, "I have sometimes met blacks who, as a condition of social acceptance of me, require me to prove my blackness by passing the suffering tests. It was as though her light skin and privileged upbringing disqualified her from immediate membership in the black community. She said she had to earn it, not through empathy, but through pain." And so she would explain how these encounters unfolded. So she said in social settings, she would find herself in conversations where black acquaintances would recount harrowing experiences with racism, and they would wait for her to match with her own story. And she said she immediately, like the first time that this happened to her, she misunderstood. And she said instead of finding solidarity, she was often met with skepticism. Quote, "And I would have it all explained to me why that wasn't really so bad and why it wasn't the same thing at all," she writes. And for Adrian Piper, this was the cruelty of the suffering test, that no matter how much pain she had endured, it was never enough. She felt like her suffering was always diminished, always framed as lesser, as though the lighter the skin, the lighter the burden. And so despite identifying as black, seeing herself as black, Piper found herself outside the black community's understanding of itself. And she felt that the purpose of the suffering test was never to include her, but to exclude her. And so I've spent some time with Adrian Piper. I've been reading her stuff, and there's more. We could do a lot of deep dives. There's some real great channels out there that do really long videos. I'm impressed by those channels. I don't watch really long videos on YouTube. I will watch a lot of short videos. I don't know what the difference is, but to me, I need I need a new thing every 15 minutes, I guess. So I'm part of the problem, but I'm going to keep this video. I don't want it to be too long, but there's a lot to talk about with Adrian Piper. But I think her experiences in both the white and the black communities highlight this, devastating truth that to live in a world governed by rigid racial identities is to be continually rejected. No matter which community you seek acceptance from, there will always be barriers when we erect these very high binary walls. The concept of passing for white, I think, is much more a common thing. But the idea of passing for black, I think it raises another set of questions. It was definitely something where when I first saw her essay, I thought, is this like another Rachel Dolezal situation? Something like that. But I guess it was one of those things where I didn't even think about ever putting those words together. Like passing for white seemed like, well, of course, people did that. But passing for black, I had questions. I still have questions about that. Now, the history of passing in the United States is long and complex. In one of her essays, Piper recalls the difficulty of forgiving family members who passed for white, a choice that provided them with economic opportunities, social privileges, but it was always at the cost of abandoning their black heritage. I mean, like I said, this is extremely personal to me. You know, my mom's grandmother, she was multi-ethnic, multiracial. I think in today's language, she would maybe be considered black Hispanic or something. I mean, I don't know the language, you know, how the words are always changing, what we can say, what we can't say. It's a tension that forces us to ask, what does it really mean to pass? And if we can pass, do we have an obligation to declare who we are? She did some other stuff, very challenging work, and maybe I'll dive in some more. She had a self-portrait. It's called a self-portrait exaggerating my negroid features. And she said that she, like this isn't her own words, but basically the gist of what she was saying was that she was using this exaggeration to force viewers to confront their assumptions about racial identity and destabilizing this concept of race, revealing that a lot of time it's just a reliance on physical cues. Do we see this trait, or this trait? And if we do or we don't, we decide what box to put someone in. She also has these cards that she made. They're called calling cards. And she had one, I think I'll have to put it on here, but it was basically like, dear friend, I'm black. And I think it was, she would use these, like if someone was saying racist things around her because they thought they could say things like that around her because she was white, she would hand out these cards to them and letting them know that they had misjudged her and you know, not to do that around her. I know I'm gonna get flagged for this video. I keep getting flagged for using a word. And I know people have said, don't use the word, like use a variation of the word. But the video that originally I've gotten in trouble for, let me just describe it before I say the word, that my mom's cousin, so wonderful, and she was helping me do some genealogy work for their grandmother. My mom's cousin's dad, so this is my great-granduncle. He's still alive. I interviewed him. And they told me this story of how he needed his birth certificate when he was like 50. And he's in his mid-80s right now. And he went and he got it. And they were looking at it, and it was the long form birth certificate because there's a short form, at least in New York, a short form and a long form. And the long form has a lot more information on it. And the long form birth certificate had him listed as colored. And everybody was just like, what? What? Like, because nobody knew the family story, or not enough of it. And so that's the word that I'm not supposed to say. And I've thought about finding ways to get around it, just maybe putting the text on the screen, or whatever, but I just don't want to. I just don't want to. And maybe I'm just being stubborn and stupid and stubborn, but it's too important to me, not even as a historian, but it's too important to me to use the words when we're talking about history. Like, let's just keep it real. Like this is how people talk. This is how birth certificates are written up. And so now that word's considered, according to YouTube, as offensive as the F word, which offends me. It really does. Not like, even on a personal level. It's just intellectually stupid. Like I can't deal with it. But her installation of Cornered spoke to me. When I saw those two birth certificates on the wall, there's this weird lie, I think, that I tell myself, maybe you do this too, that sometimes, you know, things that you're working out in your life or your family or whatever, and you think like, this is just your own weird family thing. Nobody else has this weird thing. Like, how could you even bring it up? It's so weird and out there. And to me, a lot of it has centered on just the struggle and thoughts about the birth certificates and what it has meant for me to uncover more about my family's story and my family's experiences that they tried to protect us from, and then to see the birth certificates on the wall I realize this is not an isolated topic, but it's something that I don't know. The generation, my grandparents' generation, this was not a thing they were talking about like this. It was be unheard of to do something like this, sit down, have a conversation like this about it. I think for my parents' generation, my parents are amazing. They watch this channel. They're incredible, incredible people. But, I think a lot of people in that generation, like I'm almost 40, so like they're boomers or whatever, uh, working as hard as they can to give their kids something better than they have. And I feel like that was the focus of that generation. And I feel like here, I'm a millennial. And I think a lot of us are waking up to the fact that we were provided with so much. Our parents wanted to provide for us. They did the best they could, working multiple jobs, doing all this stuff. But now we have the luxury of being able to sit back and say, okay, so what's the real story about our family? Like now that we're not in such survival mode, what really happened? And maybe you're like me. I mean, I didn't wake up to this until my Grammy was almost gone. Thankfully, I was able to ask her some questions. But for a lot of us, like we're untangling this. And I think Adrian Piper's work was ahead of her time for sure. And it's just amazing to me that this was, decades ago. And it just stands the test of time still. The whole thing. The feeling of being cornered, of having to choose. Are you rejecting this? Are you not doing this? Why are you making this choice? It's so insightful. And like good art, I don't have an answer. It's giving me more questions. And I think that is a sign of really good art. It really is. Let me know what you think. Can you pass for black? Can you pass for black? This is the thing Adrian Piper asks. I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And if you're interested in watching the series, includes footage of my mom, my aunts, my Grammy before she passed away, family in Louisiana, digging into this history. I would love to share that with you. First videos I ever did, and they weren't made for mass consumption. They were really made for my mom and distant cousins I was sharing them with. And now, I don't know. I'm so glad to be able to share them with you. Oh, that reminds me. So the censorship stuff, it's been a real nightmare. So thank you to everyone who has been supporting me by buying merch. Like it has made a huge difference for me last month. Like it made such a huge difference. And I want to just show you now that I have these washed and I'm one of those people, I don't want to wear a thing if it hasn't been washed. And so I had this stuff and it wasn't ready to be worn. So I couldn't show you. So I've got this shirt. Come over. And then I also have, I love this sweatshirt so much. So this Be a Good Ancestor, and it's just it's so good. And Nashville's kind of hot, so I haven't been able to wear it, but I'm wearing my shirt. But yeah, if you'd love to support the channel, that's a great way to do it. Honestly, just having you here makes a huge difference. It does. It helps so much. So I appreciate that. But if you want to check out the merch, you can go to nytonashville.com. Otherwise, I'll leave a link to those other videos, and we'll talk soon. Over the last 2 years, I've been telling the stories that often get ignored. But lately, I've been facing an uphill battle behind the scenes of each video. My videos are getting flagged by YouTube when all I'm doing is sharing real history. If these stories have ever resonated with you or given you a new perspective, grab some Be a Good Ancestor merch and help me keep this channel going. Check out nytonashville.com.